You're listening to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, and this is your weekly reminder to take up big space in life, laugh loudly, absorb new knowledge, and continue to grow and expand. What She Said is your space for the big conversations that matter and the little joys that make life sweeter. This is where empowerment meets self-care and mansplaining has no seat at the table. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into it because life's too short not to embrace the good stuff while we tackle the tough stuff. Sports betting is everywhere, and you're not imagining how much it has crept into our everyday lives. It's on jerseys, baked into broadcast sponsorships, and living right on our phones. One tap, and you're no longer just watching the game, you're sweating a bet. My guest today is Deborah Wainwright, writer, director, and executive producer with Lake Tide Media, and she's behind the new documentary Swipe, Bet, Repeat. The film looks at how legalized app-based sports betting has reshaped the culture of fandom, blurred the line between spectator and gambler, and changed the way we relate to athletes and the games we love. What really drew me in, of course, is that Deb centered the film on women bettors without pointing at it or making it the headline. The message lands quietly but clearly. Women are gambling too, building expertise and community in a space many still assume belongs to men. Swipe, Bet, Repeat is streaming now on CBC Gem as part of The Passionate Eye. I'll put my money on this conversation being worth your time. Let's hear what she said. Deb, when you started researching this film, what jumped out at you about how quickly sports betting has become mainstream? And what do you think pushed it forward the way it has?
For me, it was the sheer number of ads for betting companies that I was seeing on, jerseys, on the boards around games, or on the sports field. Even the sports highlights or the discussion shows were being sponsored by sports betting companies. And I just started to notice more and more and more of them. And I wanted to investigate what was going on. And of course, I think the answer for why we're seeing so much more of it, or all of a sudden we're seeing so much more of it, was because it hasn't been that long since it became legal in Canada. I think it was 2023 in Canada, and it was only 2018 in the United States. So we went from 0 to 100 in very short order.
So let's talk about the impact of that. From what you saw, how has the rise of mobile betting changed the culture around watching sports? Does it feel like a different world than, a few years ago? Because you did mention 2018 in the States and 2023 in Canada. That really has, to me, seems to have upset things quickly.
It really has. And I think Danny Funt, who is an expert that we spoke with in the film, he is a journalist who spent most of his career looking into sports and looking into sports gambling. And so I was really interested to hear what Danny had to say when the NBA scandal came out recently. And of course, he had thoughts. I think there's been an astronomical change in the way gambling and sports have been entwined. The argument for legalizing sport gambling, as I understand it from our experts, was that it would be safer. And it would be, people are gambling on sports anyway. They're just going offshore for sport books and doing it illegally. And so if we make it legal, we'll be able to monitor it, and we'll be able to protect gamblers, and we'll be able to protect athletes. But I think that Danny would argue that the temptation for athletes to engage in gambling has increased because of the way we gamble on sports now, and in particular, the proliferation really of prop bets, which are single wagers on single behavior or a single outcome. It's not just the outcome of the game, which is the money line bet, which is what we used to bet on. This team will win, this team will lose. Now we bet on an individual athlete's performance, how he'll score, whether he'll score fewer points than expected. And these prop bets, I guess, they're the ones that, as I understand it, the sports book make the most money on, because there are so many different things you can bet on now. The Gatorade color at the Super Bowl being one of them, or how long the national anthem will be. These little tiny things influence and the way we gamble, and it gives the athletes an opportunity to meaningfully influence the outcome of a game in a very simple way. That's, I think, really tempting, because it feels like a harmless side bet, or who's going to notice if I don't make that one free throw. And so it's really, really tempting. And so I think that has dramatically changed how we interact with sports, because we're looking at every single minute thing now, whereas it used to be we were engaging with the game as a whole.
So I just want to focus on athletes for just a second, because I don't know if you ran into these conversations, but for the athletes in particular, some have been caught, as we talked about, in scandals of betting, but also some have received death threats after, a bad game because people had money riding on them. Did that darker side of things come up for you during production of this?
We did talk about it. We talked about it with both our characters and the experts that we were speaking about, but it really wasn't the focus, or the effect of the athlete on the athletes with gambling wasn't really the focus of the film, although it would have been wonderful to include an athlete, a professional athlete, in the film. That's easier said than done. But it is easy to imagine, when you're talking with sports gamblers, how betting on the micro behaviors of an athlete, the next pitch or the next goal or the next foul, is much more personal and more immediate to the bettor than it used to be. It used to be the athlete was a part of a team, and now the athlete is the face of the bet. So the loss is more personal. And if you're, the gamblers that we were dealing with, for the most part, we're not putting a lot of money down, but when a lot of money is riding on it, now they have an actual face, to connect with that loss. And so it's a dangerous little game.
So do you think that relationship then between the fans and the athletes has changed as the more betting has moved into the sport?
Oh, absolutely. It used to be, as I say, the athletes were like the heroes of the game, or the goats of the game, or the hero of the championship. But now they're not just players in the game. Now they're
like an investment almost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they are, in effect, the singular reason for a win or a loss. So when fans place bets, they sort of believe that they have a stake in that athlete's individual performance, or the decisions that he or she makes while they're on the playing field. And when it goes wrong, prop bet is lost, for example. The frustration becomes so personal. Danny argues that gambling has fundamentally rewired fan psychology, where it used to be that fans would root for the players. Now they bet on the players. So instead of, I hope he plays well, it's become, he needs to hit 15 points or he's going to cost me money. And that's a huge difference in perspective, in fan perspective.
Yeah, it absolutely changes the game as far as I'm concerned. So I think what drew my attention to this, and you didn't really draw attention to this in the press release, but the central characters in this film are all women. And stats show that men still really dominate the betting world. So what made you center women in this?
Well, we're women. We had a sense that there was a rapid increase in the number of women who were betting on sports, just from hearing different people talk about placing bets. And we wondered if it was true. We wondered if it had anything to do with the increased attention that was being paid to women's professional sports. And then we wondered if the experience of women gamblers might be different from the experience that men had. We did find some stats that suggest more women are gambling, but it could be simply that no one ever paid attention to tallying those things before. And it could be that the apps are paying more attention to the woman gambler because they want to make sure that they can pull more of them in and get more of their money. But the connection between that and women's sports was a bit tenuous. We never found an actual connection in that way. In fact, everyone, men and women, are betting when they can on women's sports. It just seems the increase is simply that it's come along with the advent of the apps. And it's come along with legalization. It used to be that if you wanted to gamble, you had to go to some seedy backroom sports book, or you had to go to Vegas. But now you can gamble anywhere, and you can sit on your couch and you can gamble at home, or you can be in the subway or whatever. So ultimately we decided that, the connections that we imagined might be there between this increase we were seeing and what was actually going on weren't there. But it dawned on us that no one would even notice if an entire film about online sports gambling had an entirely male cast. So why not have an entirely female cast and hope that our thesis comes through, which is that women are gambling too, and they're doing this for a living, and they're being seen as experts in this area, and have that come out without sort of pointing at it or highlighting it.
Pointing out the obvious, yeah.
Yeah.
So did you notice differences in how women approach betting or talk about it compared to men? Or were there moments where they were clearly breaking the usual stereotypes? I don't even know if there is a stereotype, to be honest, in betting, but perhaps there is.
A lot of research has been done on gambling and even online gambling, but not particularly online sports gambling. So based on what we know about, what they say about how women gamble versus how men gamble, how women take risks versus how men take risks, and also the stereotype of who is a gambler, we did expect to hear a lot about stereotypes and possibly even shame that women were feeling. But when we spoke with our characters, when they talked about their experiences, they didn't, for the most part, suggest feeling any trepidation or mansplaining or anything like that highlighted a difference for them. But they did speak a lot more about community. And that's not something men do particularly when they talk about gambling or when they talk about sports. But women often talked about that. And one of the experts that we talked to in the film has created a women's online sports betting community. So it's interesting that they sort of bring each other along, teach them how to use the apps, support them, in a way that men don't talk about when it comes to sports.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because women do that everywhere, don't we? We create community. It doesn't matter where we are. We create community. So that's really interesting that you noticed that. Yeah. I'd like to talk about some of the characters a little bit. So is it Monet? Is that how her name's pronounced? So Monet is described as a borderline expert who loves a big parlay. So for listeners who might not know, including myself, because I have no idea, can you explain what a parlay is and why it pulls people in?
Mm-hmm. It's so funny because it's actually quite a simple concept, but trying to explain it in words, it gets a little bit tricky. So let me know if I lose you. Parlays are basically combinations of bets, or the stacking of bets. So for example, you could bet on the Blue Jays to win the game. But it becomes a parlay when you also bet on what the total runs might be, or what the total runs might be for one team versus the other team, or whether a team will score a run in the first inning. And if you stack all of those bets, so who will win, how many runs will be, if there'll be a run in the first inning, you stack all of those bets, it increases your payout, because as you stack the bets, your odds of winning go down. The odds get worse the more bets you stack, but the payout gets bigger and bigger. So in the case of our Blue Jays bet, if you bet someone will score in the first inning and no one does, your whole bet is blown. If you you also can stack not just on that one game, you could stack on multiple games going on that week or that month. And when we were with Monet, she made, for example, a 10-leg parlay. So she put 10 individual bets in and she stacked them all as one parlay. And her $10 bet meant that she could win $4,000 as her payout. And that's the draw. $10 seems like nothing, but if you could win, you could make $4,000.
So she has to get every single one of those correct, though.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's why the odds are so terrible and the payouts are so good. And she has had success at this. And 10 legs is a lot. Usually a parlay is 3, maybe 4. But, you put down $10 and you could win $200, $5 and win $400, depending on how bad bad the odds are, but the odds are terrible. The odds are
Right.
terrible. But if
Okay.
you win, it's thrilling. And so Monet finds straight bets really boring. And she is a daily gambler of the parlay.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all have.
This was before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from jeffwoodsradio.com.
You spent some time, obviously, with Monet. What was her relationship with betting like once you spent some time with her? What was your impression?
Monet is an amazing woman. She is intense and driven. She is a medical professional, and she lives in Philadelphia. So she is a massive sports fan. You can't help but be if you live in Philadelphia. But she is indeed a daily gambler, and she sets limits for herself, weekly limits, I believe. But she admits that she sometimes goes over them. She doesn't keep track of where she's at, wins versus losses. But she feels like she's doing okay. And the amount that she limits herself to each week, she says would be spent on something else, like going out to dinner or going out and, having drinks with her friends. So she's going to spend it on the parlay instead. I think she does worry a little bit about how much she gambles, but she's not willing to say that she has a problem, and I hope she doesn't.
So Jessica comes in as the rookie in this. So what pulled her into sports betting in the first place?
Jessica is absolutely hilarious. She had a dream about the result of an upcoming NFL game. So she loaded an app onto her phone and placed a bet. And in fact, she accidentally made a 2-leg parlay because she didn't know what she was doing. So she bet $50. And when both legs of her parlay hit, she made $250. So she decided to just keep going. And that weekend, she then bet on the Mets, and she won that as well. And she had this amazing string of beginner's luck. She was a great character because through her, we could see that initial draw and how the win can bring you to the next win. She talks a little bit about how she feels guilty that she took the money and immediately gambled it again. And she struggles with that a little bit. And she also gambles with how incredibly complicated the apps can be. So she was our guinea pig, our learner.
So the last one really interests me because I see this one a lot on social media. Again, just like parlay, I don't understand it. But so Amber is another person you sort of focused on, and she dives into fantasy sports. I have no idea what that means. So, and she's pushing towards a full-time career in this. So, A, what is fantasy sports? B, what did she teach you about the business side of betting and the growing sort of creator influencer world around it?
Yeah. I knew you were going to ask about fantasy sports because I had no understanding of it. Basically, you take the whole pool of all the professionals and you get into a group, and then the whole pool of professionals, you one by one put them on your team. So in fantasy football or in fantasy sports of anything, you create your own team within that league, and then you decide how to play the team, what your starting lineup is going to be and who you're going to pull out. And then you worry, if somebody actually gets hurt in real world NFL, he's off your roster. If you've had him on your roster, you can't play him. So you're acting like a coach or a manager of a team with this little team that you've created for yourself and in the league that you have with this group of people against whom you're playing. It's so complicated, but it's huge. And she was in 16 different leagues at one point and having so much fun. And she's so full of joy and enthusiasm. She has a true, deep passion for the Chicago Bears. And from what I understand, that's a very sad passion to have these days. They're not the best team. But one day she just was having so much fun with it and thought, I wonder if I could do this for a living. So she connected with some other people to start learning about how to have an online fantasy sport network. What didn't make it into the film, but we went to Las Vegas with her for a fantasy sports conference. And it was really illuminating because it showed us that this business of betting is growing in myriad ways. You know, you could be a consultant, or you could be an advisor, or you can create your own fantasy network like Amber. And if anyone's going to make a go of it, I think it's Amber, because she is absolutely determined and enthusiastic.
Did any of the women talk about a moment when betting crossed a line for them, or when they realized it was becoming more than a hobby?
I mean, aside from Amber and Pam, who was the ESPN sports analyst, all of the rest of our characters are just doing this as a hobby. But are you meaning that it became a little bit more of an addiction?
Yeah. Do they feel themselves do they feel the pull towards that addiction? Because it is addiction. I mean, when you were saying, even when you were mentioning, Jessica accidentally put down a parlay and won 250, I can immediately understand why she would want to play again. Most people could.
Absolutely.
So, and so that pull is very strong. Obviously we have heaps of programs to help people with an addiction like this. So do any of them feel that pull? Have they crossed a line?
None of them addressed that as such. They were very cautious. And I think because there is such a stigma around gambling, and now we've got a camera in their face and we're talking about this daily habit of theirs as well, they didn't really talk about or reveal anything, except Monet, who definitely talked about how she worried, she worries a little bit. She thinks she's doing okay, but she worries a little bit. And really, Sherry, who was the horse player, she talked a little bit about becoming a professional. Monet we asked her about doing this as a profession. And both of them, talked about trepidation, not so much in the way that it becomes an addiction, but more that it would take the fun out of it for them, which is part of the addiction, right? So I'm not saying either of them have an addiction. I'm just suggesting that I think every one of our characters knew that they were walking this slippery slope, but they all felt they were still at the top of it.
Do you think the industry is doing enough to support people who may be struggling or drifting into problem territory? I mean, these apps are so accessible. The betting is so accessible. I feel just, from observationally, of course, that this is one of those things that we've let get away from us without having proper guardrails in place.
Yeah, I went to a conference about a year ago, actually, before we started shooting the film here in Vancouver, that had people from all over the world come and talk about people, part of all the different apps and the different provincial and national, elements that are allowing gambling and working with gamblers. And the whole conference was about how to support gamblers, discussing, ways to track wins and losses, ways to limit yourself from gambling when you're on the app. It can put a limit on how much you're allowed to bet, those kind of things. But the problem, I think, is that there's a conflict for the sports books because they need people to gamble in order to, and they say they don't want problem gamblers, but I think it's a bit of a catch-22. And I think it's difficult for them to figure out how best to handle this. I do believe that there are people in all of those companies that are working to keep an eye on this. But I think you're right. I think it's moving pretty quickly. And if we look at the UK, if we look at Australia, they've had legalized gambling a lot longer than us. So we can see where we're going. And it's not great.
That'll be your next documentary.
Yeah, maybe.
So when people watch this film, what do you hope they walk away thinking about? Curiosity, caution, awareness? Is there something else?
Well, you say that the addiction and where it's going could be our next film. We were really cautious. We wanted to present our thesis in a fun way, in an entertaining way, to show that there's fun and, it's a game, right? But we wanted the message to come through, and we hope it does. And that message is that everybody loses. So it is fun, but everybody loses.
Did that surprise you?
That everybody loses?
Yeah.
No. You always say the house always wins. I mean, there's a reason why these companies become sports books. It's to make money. And so if people were doing well at it, the sports books, there certainly wouldn't be so many sports books out there, for sure.
So what would you say to people then to keep in mind the next time they pick up their phone during a game and want to place a bet? Any advice?
Watch the game. That's where the fun really lies. I have since they were created, I have been a massive Blue Jays fan, and I am not an online sports gambler, not for the least of reasons, which was I still struggle to understand how the apps work, having spent a year playing with them. But I had so much fun watching them last year.
Same.
Because
what a game. What a series.
All of it. The whole season was so much
it was
fun.
great. Yeah.
And that's where the fun really lies. And everybody loses. So dabble, but know going in that in the end, you're not going to be the winner. The sports books are going to be the winner.
So where can people then catch the documentary?
Right now it's living on CBC Gem, streaming on CBC Gem in Canada only. And we are hoping that it'll be crossing the borders in different directions at some point.
And if there's somewhere that people, when we have questions or want to reach out or keep up with other projects you're on, where can they do that?
Our website for the production company is laketide.ca.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today, Deb.
Thank you so much. It's been fun talking to you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who'd love it too. And don't forget to hit subscribe to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, on your favorite podcast app. It's the easiest way to stay connected. Want more? Sign up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com to get all the latest updates, and let's keep the conversation going on social. You can find What She Said on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find me on Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Candace Said. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Avery Kundal, the declutter queen. If you've ever looked around your home and thought, how did it get like this? You're not alone. But decluttering isn't just about getting rid of stuff. It's about letting go of what's weighing you down, physically, emotionally, and mentally. On the Declutter Queen podcast, I share real-life strategies, honest conversations, and simple systems to help you clear the chaos and create space for what actually matters. No perfection, no pressure, just progress, one drawer, one decision, one mindset shift at a time. So if you're ready to reclaim your space, your time, and your peace of mind, come join me in the kingdom.
The Declutter Queen is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, TrueFans, and at thedeclutterqueen.ca. The world of audio is evolving fast, so much so that it often means video as well. These days, staying ahead isn't an advantage. It is a necessity. I'm Matt Kundal, and every week on the Sound Off podcast, I speak with the people shaping the future of podcast, broadcast, and audio. Whether you're behind the mic, in the production studio, or in the boardroom, this is your weekly look into the trends, talent, and tech driving audio forward. The Sound Off podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and at soundoffpodcast.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.